The Power of Now, A Guide to Spiritual Enlightenment 1997 by Eckhart Tolle is a handbook for finding inner peace or enlightenment. All too often, people build their identities around the past or the future instead of living fully in the present moment. The key to enlightenment is to shift focus to the now. Pure consciousness, also known as being, is a state of being at one with every other person and thing in the universe. This state is natural, but it is not common. While the power of pure consciousness is available to everyone, most people experience life as fragmented. They let themselves be absorbed by experiences over which they have no control. A common mistake that people make is to connect their selfhood or personal identity to their thoughts and emotions. Thoughts and emotions are real in that they are experienced, but the idea that they can be controlled is untrue. People become attached to negative emotions like fear and anxiety, but it is far better to observe or watch these emotions than to analyze or identify with them. It is possible and even ideal to detach from the constant din of one's inner voice and cultivate the capacity to become an impartial observer of one's own life. In pursuing this sense of detachment, people will come to understand that what they consider problems are illusory. Higher consciousness or enlightenment is not about thinking or feeling, but being. It can be achieved through practices such as mindfulness and meditation, both of which help tune out distractions and negative emotions. In observing what is, one should either accept it or, if possible, act to change it. Resisting whatever is happening in the present moment without moving to change it is folly. Focusing on the past or the future is also folly, because they are intellectual constructs that impinge upon lived experience. Life consists of whatever is happening right here, right now. Emotional states, whether positive or negative, are like weather. They are inevitable and ever-changing. It's better to turn one's attention away from these transient circumstances and look inward to what is enduring and true. The path to enlightenment is available to anyone at any time, though most people either can't see it or choose not to follow it. The intense suffering in this world would be alleviated if only people transcended their individual circumstances and tapped into the current of pure consciousness that powers the world. To tap into the power of now, one must live in the present moment. But far too often, people tend to dwell on the past or the future. The biggest obstacle to enlightenment is the human tendency to dwell on past events or worry about what will happen in the future. Many of life's problems are illusory, stemming from this undue focus on the past and future. Something bad that happened in the past isn't truly a problem because it can't be changed. Something bad that might happen in the future isn't a real problem because it hasn't happened yet. The present moment is the only thing that truly exists. The past and the future are merely intellectual constructs that cause pain. True contentment arises from the ability to live fully in the perpetual now, which demands intense, exclusive focus on the present moment. Scientific findings suggest that there are concrete disadvantages to fixating on the past or the future. Some researchers believe that rumination may lead to a whole host of psychological disorders, including clinical depression and addiction. Rumination is also a predictive trait in identifying people who may become depressed. Researchers distinguish between rumination, which looks back in time, and worry, which is a future-facing emotion. Worry, too, can help researchers predict a person's likelihood of being diagnosed with depression at a later date. In sharp contrast, psychologists have found that focusing on the present moment can make people feel happier. Research suggests that activities that require a high level of engagement, such as a conversation or physical exercise, make people happier than activities such as computer work, which are more likely lead to disengagement or daydreaming. Even positive daydreams can detract from a person's general sense of well-being. Everyone has an internal narrator in his or her head. This narrator should not be equated with one's personal identity or sense of self. The human brain provides running commentary on life that many people mistake for their true self. But this narration should not be equated with personal identity. René Descartes famously declared, "I think, therefore I am," a statement that has been hugely influential in Western philosophy. In fact, the inverse is true. The argument of the power of now could be described as something closer to, "I am not what I think." But the thinking self can sometimes act as a sort of imposter who wreaks havoc and sows discontent. When possible, this narrator should be silenced or ignored. The notion of the thinking self as an enemy to enlightenment conflicts with conventional wisdom. which generally positions cogitation and imagination as positive attributes. Scientists and psychologists have long recognized people's capacity for imaginative scenario building, storytelling, and mental reflection as characteristics that set humans not just apart, but above other animals. But the human capacity for reflection and imagination is not always useful or desirable. Painful emotions such as regret and anxiety are damaging falsehoods. Emotions are illusory and damaging. Robert Wright, an author who examines Buddhist principles through the lens of evolutionary psychology and why Buddhism is true, describes emotions as a survival mechanism that formerly served an important function. In the contemporary world, however, this mechanism frequently malfunctions. Such feelings are, and always were, subjective falsehoods that don't correlate with objective reality. The brain is driven to explain the motivation behind a given behavior as consistent and logical, when it often is not. Such false explanations feel emotionally resonant and true, allowing a person to seem self-possessed in the face of uncertainty. Thousands of years ago, when humans were in constant competition with their rivals, such self-possession provided an advantage. In today's world, however, such stories are misleading and no longer provide an evolutionary advantage. Indulging painful sentiment is always a choice. Too many people accept negative emotions like anxiety into their lives when such feelings serve no functional purpose. In traditional Buddhist teachings, negative emotions are described as spiritually unhealthy. Buddhism distills negative emotions into three sources called kleshas or poisons. The three poisons are ignorance, attachment, and dislike. Each one is separate, but the three are often interrelated. For example, the first poison, ignorance, might lead a person to believe that love is necessarily possessive. The attachment that would result from such ignorance might be a possessive feeling, which leads to overbearing behavior. The third poison, dislike, typically arises from a thwarted attachment, such as when a possessive person is rejected by a romantic partner. An enlightened person understands the truth, which is that love is not possessive, and would therefore not form an unhealthy attachment that could potentially result in dislike. It is possible for people to disengage from their personal emotions and observe them without judgment. Rather than get swept up in the negative emotional charge of a given moment, one should cultivate an air of detached watchfulness. For example, if people are hungry, instead of worrying about where to procure food, they can focus attention on the sensation of hunger itself. In the Buddhist analogy of the waterfall, the water represents emotional tumult, and disengagement creates a space behind the water where one can stand. The mind must shift its focus from mental spinning to raw sensations. One of the most important benefits of observing emotions without judgment is the ability to better cope with negative experiences and other forms of distress. Psychologists who study emotional regulation distinguish between an emotional trigger and the subsequent interpretation of an emotion. People who are unable to regulate their emotions tend to interpret emotional triggers negatively. Such a person may interpret the fact that a colleague did not stop to talk in the break room as a sign of dislike, when in reality that person was distracted or in a hurry. A more detached person might have noted the colleague's behavior neutrally rather than interpreting it as a slight. Mindfulness, the practice of being aware of what's happening in the present moment, is an essential skill. Mindfulness is an ancient Eastern practice with roots in Buddhism, Hinduism, and Chinese traditions. More recently, it has become an object of study for spiritualists, academics, and pop culture fanatics alike. By 2016, mindfulness had become such a mainstream practice that the New York Times began running a regular column, Meditation for Real Life. Secular Western mindfulness as it is practiced today can be informal or more structured. The former involves attending to every personal experience, however difficult or mundane, with an open mind. The latter might include guided meditation or a formalized practice like transcendental meditation. Mindfulness sounds simple, but it may not come easily or naturally, especially with modern distractions like mobile phones. Establishing a regular mindfulness practice, much in the way one would go to the gym, helps cultivate a calm, uncluttered mind. Even devoting as little as 5 minutes per day to mindfulness can have noticeable effects on cognition and concentration levels. Meditation, which is a more formal type of mindfulness, is a highly beneficial practice. Meditation, which has roots in many different religious traditions, helps people transcend the difficulties of day-to-day living to find a sustainable sense of inner peace. The health-promoting properties of meditation arose as an object of study in the scientific community in the 1960s. Around the same time, celebrity practitioners such as the Beatles made meditation a more mainstream part of Western culture. Scientific researchers have found neurological evidence that meditation can cause changes in the brain's theta wave activity, which is associated with calmness. Scientists have also discovered that meditation can help address sleeping problems. In one study, a formal 6-week course on guided meditation inspired more improvement among troubled sleepers than a course on sleep hygiene. Sleep is important to both mental and physical well-being, and meditation may be an effective intervention for people who are reluctant to try a pharmaceutical solution. Different meditation practices enhance different capacities, and specific types of meditation are best for certain goals. Researchers who studied different forms of meditation found that inward-facing techniques, such as guided breathing, help improve concentration, whereas more outward-facing forms like loving-kindness meditation sharpen social skills. To promote inner peace, a well-rounded practice that involves several types of meditation may be most beneficial. The self as an autonomous entity is unimportant and, to some degree, unreal. It is beneficial to cultivate a sense of feeling connected to the universe. Generally, people tend to focus on personal identity when they should be more concerned with being, which is the state of feeling connected to the world. One must transcend individuality to cultivate this sense of connectedness. The distinction between self and not self is fundamental to Buddhist teachings. In Discourse on the Not Self, the Buddha interrogates 5 monks about what exactly a self consists of. He systematically goes through what he calls the 5 aggregates to demonstrate that there is no such thing as selfhood in the way that most people understand it. For example, some people might assert that the physical body, which is one of the 5 aggregates, is the seat of selfhood. But the Buddha maintained that since individuals don't have complete control over their bodies, the physical body cannot be said to be the self. The Buddha also pointed to the way in which memory and the body change over time as evidence that there is no such thing as autonomous selfhood. A Buddhist monk, Walpolar Rahula, described this false sense of selfhood as the root of all bad things, including individual problems like negative emotions and large-scale issues like war. The Dalai Lama has made a self-interested case for trying to be less self-centered, describing the beneficial effects that can be reaped when one routinely practices compassion for others. In other words, one of the best ways to promote one's own self-interest is to focus on helping other people. The intellect cannot fully comprehend the most critical concepts of spirituality, but this should not be considered a problem. The concepts that are most critical to unlocking the power of the present moment aren't necessarily intellectually comprehensible. Often, spiritual concepts such as being manifest as more of a bodily sensation than a cerebral notion. It's important not to spend too much time on rational questions and semantic distinctions. Spirituality should be felt rather than understood. Incomprehensibility and paradox are 2 essential characteristics of Buddhist teachings. Many Buddhist thinkers maintain that the Buddha's ideas about not-self can only be understood experientially. For example, the monk who popularized Vipassana meditation in the Western world, Ajahn Chah, felt that the concept of not-self could only be understood through meditation. In Buddhism, meditation is the primary lens through which the world and the self, or more accurately the not-self, can be grasped. Many teachers believe that language is fundamentally incapable of adequately representing universal truths.